Hey guys, Modelling Weekly here. In this week's video, I'll be returning to my series of tutorial videos with the latest edition, a full guide on adding rivets to your model aircraft. This is a highly requested guide and one that has been in the works for a while now, so it's definitely in need of release. I'll be covering all the ins and outs of the process that I use when going about riveting my aircraft, including the research process, which in my opinion is one of the most important. So without wasting any more time, let's get started. I really hope you find it useful. Before we do get stuck in, I'd just like to answer the following question. Why add rivets? Well, the simple answer is you don't have to, if it's not something you're interested in doing. It can take quite a bit of time, depending on the size of the model and also the subject in particular, so for some people it simply isn't worth doing. In my opinion, however, rivets are definitely worth it, especially when the aircraft at hand features large, boring, empty surface panels that are just begging for some extra detail. Rivets are a fantastic way of doing that, adding interest and realism where the model is otherwise lacking. They're also very handy during the weathering stage, as they'll very effectively receive any washes that you plan on using. Overall, they get the thumbs up from me. Let's also quickly run over the tools and consumables that you're going to need throughout the process, along with a tool that can come in handy but isn't strictly necessary. First of all, you'll of course need a rivet tool, which comes in a variety of forms. The cheapest and most common type is this plastic kind, often sold by Trumpeter and Rivets. It's alright and gets the job done, but it isn't very dexterous. I personally make use of the Galaxy Tools rivet tool, which allows for much more accurate riveting thanks to the smaller head size and the lack of a shroud around the blade that blocks your vision. You can pick these up for around £20 on eBay, which does seem like a lot, but it will last you a very long time if you treat it well. Another very famous riveter is the Rosie the Riveter tool, which is renowned by many modelers around the world. They're unfortunately very hard to find these days, however, as the creator Peter Dusek sadly passed away. However, if you can get your hands on one, then they're definitely worth having. Alongside the riveter, you'll also want a soft pencil for marking the guidelines onto the surface of the model, along with a roll of rubberized or plastic tape for guiding the riveting tool along the surface. It doesn't really matter what kind of tape you use for this, so long as it's thick enough to push the riveting tool slightly against the side of it as a stopper. Dymo tape is the best for this, however I find Tamiya flexible masking tape to be a pretty good alternative. You'll also want to get some fine sandpaper, probably around 1000 to 2000 grit, along with a polishing cloth, tissue paper and isopropyl alcohol. Finally, a tool that you may or may not want to use is a drawing compass, fitted with two metal points instead of a graphite one on one side. I'll explain this later on in the video, however it's not strictly necessary as I've mentioned. Now for the actual process of applying them. As you might have guessed, the first stage is of course researching your subject. Depending on the aircraft, there could be a plethora of online materials available to you, or there could be next to none. Regardless of the subject, however, you'll want to be looking for not only reliable images, but ones that will actually assist in deducing where the rivets are on the aircraft's surface. Essentially, a 360p image of a Spitfire from 1945 is accurate, but obviously not going to be of any use in this situation. My first port of call when it comes to researching aircraft rivets is museum websites. Oftentimes, aircraft museums will have extensive online records of their aircraft collection, with plenty of materials such as images and walk-around videos that can be incredibly handy for modelers in general. One of my favourites is the RAF Hendon website, as their collection is pretty extensive and covers a very wide range of eras and subjects. Failing both of these options, you can always resort to a simple Google image search to see what turns up, or if you're willing to put some more cash into it, aircraft reference books for particular types are a foolproof method of attaining priceless reference images. Once you've got your references, the next stage is preparing the surface for the rivets. It's always good to have a clean canvas when you're doing this kind of work, so the first step would be to clean the surface with isopropyl alcohol just to get rid of any overspray or dirt. Next, what I like to do is roughly mark out the locations of the rivets using a 2B or 4B drawing pencil, allowing you to develop a rough idea of where they're going to go. The beauty of this technique is that you can always remove any mistakes with a rubber. Following the marking out stage, there is an optional step that can prove pretty handy on any surfaces that have a large number of rivets away from guiding panel lines. Using the compass that I mentioned earlier, you can rest one point into the trough of a panel line and then drag the other point lightly across the surface of the model, producing a very faint guideline that is exactly parallel with the datum panel line. As I mentioned, this comes in particularly handy when you're adding rivet lines that are quite far away from any panel line references. Obviously, you can always do this by eye, hence the step being optional. However, it's quite a handy little tip when dealing with subjects such as V-bombers, which feature large open surfaces that will suffer from any riveting inaccuracies. With the marking out done, we can move on to the guide tape stage. This is a pretty self-explanatory process, as you simply cut a short strip of your chosen tape and line it up precisely with the guidelines that you've just applied. It's a pretty important step in ensuring that your rivet lines are square and orthogonal, so I'd recommend spending a decent amount of time and patience on getting this right. Definitely make sure to do a better job than I do in this video. This was just a quick example. When lining the tape up, make sure to leave a tiny gap between the tape and the location of the rivet line itself, in order to account for the thickness of the riveting blade. This will of course vary from tool to tool, so just be mindful of this. Once that's all done, you're ready to rivet. You'll want to take this slowly, making sure to press down pretty hard, whilst also adhering to the guide tape where necessary. Make sure to keep the surface orthogonal to the riveting tool at all times, so if you're going around a curve, such as the top of a fuselage, move the model relative to the cutter so that they're always square. If you start pushing at an angle, you risk your tool slipping on the surface and adding unwanted damage. Trust me, I've learnt this the hard way. Most of the time, it's best to complete a rivet line in a single pass, so make sure to practice the amount of pressure you need to apply for a well-defined rivet line on a spare bit of the kit's plastic, if there is one. The pressure that you'll need to apply varies massively between manufacturers and their different plastics, so this is definitely something you'll need to quickly test. With the rivets all done, you may think that they're ready to go, but there is in fact a very important final stage that needs to be carried out. When you add rivets, you're essentially forcing the plastic that was in the rivet cavity up and out of the hole, leaving a raised ridge around each rivet that becomes pretty noticeable once you add paint. The simple way around this is to use a piece of pretty fine sandpaper, or sanding sponge, around 1000 to 2000 grit, to knock down these ridges and unify the rivets with the surface. Following this sanding stage, the surface may appear a little bit scratched up, so the polishing cloth that I mentioned earlier can come in handy here just to soften the unwanted effects of sanding. Following this, a quick wipe with isopropyl alcohol will finish off the process, leaving you with a set of perfectly applied rivets, waiting for paint and weathering. So that pretty much sums it all up. As I mentioned previously, it can take quite a while depending on the scale and subject in question. However, in my opinion, they're a very worthwhile addition if you're up for adding them. It's up to you though, of course, so feel free to skip out on them if you don't fancy it. Before I end, I'd just like to say a massive thanks to all of my Modelling Weekly channel members here on YouTube. Your loyal support is absolutely invaluable and I can't thank you all enough, especially in recent months where the channel has suffered from my unavailability. If you'd like to find out more about what being a channel member entails, along with the perks available, feel free to click the link in the description to find out more. Thank you all so much once again. So, I really hope you found that video useful. Needless to say, methods vary massively from modeler to modeler, so if there's anything you'd like to add or contribute, feel free to pop a comment down below and I'll do my best to respond as quickly as possible. Thank you all so much for watching and good luck with all of your riveting endeavours. Take care and keep on modelling. I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye.